It's been less than 1 month since former President Donald Trump was shot in the face at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, where the difference between life and death for him was just millimetres. Now, even though the assassination attempt was streamed live on television and photographed for the world to see, the effort that tech giants are going to censor this horrific event and even gaslight the American people by pretending it never happened is next level. Just look at AI search engine ChatGPT. If you were to simply search what happened to Donald Trump getting shot, this is the answer that it generates for you. Donald Trump has not been shot. However, there have been numerous false reports, conspiracy theories, and fake news stories circulating online about such an event. These are not based on any factual incidents and should be regarded as misinformation. Now, before you start thinking of excuses, this is ChatGPT 4, the latest version of the search engine. You can try it out for yourself. And this is not the only example of censorship that we are witnessing. Just last week, Meta censored the iconic photograph of Donald Trump defiantly pumping his fist in the air with blood streaming down his face and labelled it misinformation. Misinformation. What a joke. It is one of the most iconic photographs in history. And no matter what you think of Donald Trump, it captures his strength and his leadership. Facebook eventually admitted it was wrong to censor this. Well done, Facebook. But how does this happen? Would love to know the answer. Sorry to state the obvious here, but just in case there's any confusion, because of the lies that are out there on various tech platforms, the FBI confirmed that there is absolutely no doubt Donald Trump was hit by a bullet.
Deputy Director of the FBI, is that correct?
Yes, Senator.
Is there any doubt in your mind or in the collective mind of the FBI that President Trump was shot in the ear by a bullet fired by the assassin crooks?
Senator, there is absolutely no doubt in the FBI's mind whether former President Trump was hit with a bullet and wounded in the ear. No doubt, there never has been.
Now let's look at the US election, which is right now a race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. Although Donald Trump was shot in the face a couple of weeks ago, he's been out and about giving interviews and facing tough questions. But Kamala Harris has not held one press conference since she became the presumptive Democratic nominee. And you know what? Why would she? Because she has the mainstream media fawning over her, and she can stick to speaking to crowds who've been fired up by pop stars, and she can just watch her popularity rise in the polls without facing any real scrutiny. What a leader. The latest Nate Silver poll has Kamala Harris ahead of Donald Trump with a 53% chance of winning. Here is my conversation with commentator Brad Palumbo about the mainstream media's coverage of the US election, including how an MSNBC commentator claimed that JD Vance only wants white children in America.
There, more and more Americans choosing not to have kids, which again emphasizes why J.D. Vance's comments about childless Americans, childless cat ladies, could be so politically damaging.
Well, so what's interesting is this natalism that comes from an authoritarian playbook, right? That there need to be more white children, right? That's the idea that there's, this is about great replacement theory, racism, right? This is what this is. So don't misunderstand it for him wanting more children. He wants a certain kind of, racist thing.
Let's bring in journalist Brad Palumbo. Brad, great to be with you. It just scares me how many people are listening to this kind of commentary and believing it. All of a sudden, JD Vance is a racist.
No, that's one of the most deranged and unhinged commentaries that I've heard on MSNBC in a while. And to be honest with you, that's saying something. I mean, to say that he only wants white kids when he has natalism policies where he wants to promote child rearing and increase the birth rate is absurd. He's never had anything about those policies that's limited to white children, and he literally has biracial children. As you mentioned, his wife is Indian, his kids are of mixed race. He is a family man, and he's never given any indication that he only cares about increasing the birth rate of white families or anything like that. So that's a pretty vicious smear to throw around at somebody. And it's a really unfortunate one because I agree with you that there actually is some substantive pushback for some of what JD Vance has said, but they seem determined to misconstrue his remarks in the most disingenuous way possible.
Absolutely.
I actually do disagree with a part of his argument, where he essentially argues that people who have children are better suited to wield political power because they're more likely to consider the long-term interests of the country, because he says they have skin in the game. I'm not sure I buy that, to be honest with you, because some of the greatest leaders in American history, like George Washington, had no kids. And frankly, we've been governed for decades now by people in their 80s with kids and grandkids who don't really seem to give a darn about the nation's future. But instead of kind of discussing these remarks on the substance, we're getting these out of context sound bites that are misconstruing his remarks. I don't think he ever really intended to slight women with fertility issues. That seems like a very bad faith interpretation of his remarks. And then just the unhinged commentary on MSNBC. They're just determined to take anything a Republican politician says and twist it to a totally absurd extreme.
And as you say, instead of making a conversation about the substance, we have this reaction from people out in the streets.
I'm a childless Catwoman, but I'm happy. I'm happy. Bring laughter on, you know?
Say to Vance.
Yeah, what is your message to Vance?
You don't mess with childless cat ladies.
I don't even know what to make of that. What do you think, Brad?
Did she just hiss at us?
Yes, she did.
I don't like this. This makes me feel concerned and slightly unsafe. I mean, look, I think the childless cat ladies remark from J.D. Vance was an unforced error. He shouldn't have said it, but it was years ago. But to be honest, you're not beating the weird cat lady allegations when you're going out in public with a cat mask on and growling or hissing at reporters. I mean, I'm not sure what's going on there, but it really does seem like American politics is becoming this game of ping pong where we just bounce off each other and become more and more hysterical each time we exchange responses. Seems to me that's a little bit of what's playing out here.
Absolutely. Now, the media is going into meltdown, and no doubt Donald Trump is right now being accused of being a racist because he made these comments about Kamala Harris's heritage.
I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much, and she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She has always identified as a black woman. She went to a historically black college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear.
Now, I understand why people may hear those comments and everyone screams, you can't say that. But Kamala Harris has made race and gender the biggest part of her election campaign. It's her strongest selling point that she would become the first black woman in US history to become president of the United States. So we've been hearing this from her non-stop. But back in 2019, this was the messaging from Kamala Harris.
Okay, so what we're going to cook today is an Indian recipe.
Yes.
Because you are Indian.
Yes.
Okay, and I don't know that everybody knows that, but I find that wherever I go and I see Indian people at the supermarket, on the street, everyone's like, you know, Kamala Harris is Indian, right? It's like the thing we're so excited about to have you running for president.
Yeah.
So we're both Indian, but actually we're both South Indian.
Yes. You look like the entire one half of my family.
Okay, thank you.
You do.
I've been telling people we're related already, so this is perfect. It's basically true. And so were you raised eating South Indian food?
South Indian food.
Brad, look, I think the comments from Donald Trump are not going to help him, but I do think that he reserves the right to criticise her campaign strategy, and she has made race part of her campaign strategy.
Yeah, she certainly has. And I think there's some context to this conversation that's important. I watched the entire event that Trump did with these black journalists. And from the very get-go, it was incredibly hostile. They came at him really strong. I do give him some credit for honestly going there, because he was very much going into the lion's den. And then the question he was asked that actually prompted this unfortunate response was one of is Kamala Harris a DEI candidate? And some Republicans are saying that. And he actually declined to go along with that idea, even though I actually think that'd be a more defensible position, because Biden basically said she was a DEI candidate and said he was only considering women for his vice presidency and strongly favoring women of color. So they have made identity a huge emphasis. They're absolutely drunk on identity politics, the modern Democratic Party. But I do think that Trump, this was an unforced error, because Kamala Harris can be biracial. She can be both Indian, half of her family is of Southeast Indian descent, and half of it's of Jamaican descent, which is considered Black. So she can be both. It may be true that she's emphasized the Indian side of her identity more, but Trump almost seems to be suggesting that she's like an Elizabeth Warren, or like somebody who's pretended to be an ethnicity she's not. That's not the case. And now everybody's talking about that, rather than the other parts of this event where I thought Trump actually acquitted himself very well in an incredibly hostile environment.
Yeah, we'll just keep getting those sound bites from Donald Trump on repeat for the next few days, and then some probably dangerous commentary from some media outlets. But let's look at Kamala Harris's priorities, because we touched on JD Vance's priorities, and that is to make it easier for families to raise the next generation of children in America. But Kamala Harris, well, she wants to make sure that prisoners have taxpayer-funded trans surgeries.
And there was a specific case, and when I learned about the case, I worked behind the scenes to not only make sure that that transgender woman got the services she was deserving. So it wasn't only about that case. I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care that they desired and need.
For prisoners, Brad, top priority?
No, I mean, this is not a good way to be using taxpayer dollars. It's really quite something to be pushing that. I mean, look, I believe America's a free country. Adults should do whatever they want. But ultimately, if you want those kinds of surgeries, you should pay for it yourself. You shouldn't force it onto taxpayers, especially not if you're literally behind bars because you've committed transgressions against society. The idea that they should be entitled to the full suite of gender transition surgeries and all that stuff, which is quite expensive, is pretty ludicrous. It's pretty far left, progressive, bonkers town, California style liberalism. What it's not is very palatable to a general election public, which is why those remarks are being recirculated. And the other thing I'll say is that this is a weak spot for Democrats, because we are literally at a point, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but we're literally at a point in America where they are housing biologically male inmates in women's prisons, including in cases where some of those individuals are being imprisoned for violent acts or even sex-related crimes. That's insane. I understand that maybe you need to have a separate ward or accommodations for inmates who identify as transgender, but putting violent, biologically male criminals in women's prisons is a recipe for disaster, and it's something that 9 out of 10 Americans think is absolutely nuts, I'm sure, if you ever polled such a question. Yet that's the record that places like California and the policies embraced by the progressive flank of the Democratic Party have to run on these issues. So I think that's an enormous liability for them, because it just strikes anybody with a bit of common sense as absolute madness.
Absolutely, and it's not pro-women. Look, I want to talk to you about another fear tactic that's being used by the left-wing media, and that is to connect Donald Trump with Project 2025, something that Donald Trump has repeatedly distanced himself from, and he's described it as extreme.
I don't know what the hell it is. It's Project 25. He's involved in Project, and then they read some of the things, and they are extreme. I mean, they're seriously extreme. But I don't know anything about it. I don't want to know anything about it. But what they do is misinformation and disinformation, and they keep saying, he's a threat to democracy. I'm saying, what the hell did I do for democracy? Last week, I took a bullet for democracy.
Project 2025 leader Paul Dans has stepped down as the Harris campaign continues to falsely connect this project to Donald Trump. But will this be the end of it?
No, I don't think it will be, because they've decided that this is a good poll-tested attack against Donald Trump, but it's a really bad faith smear, because Trump has condemned this Project 2025, this pretty radical conservative agenda from the Heritage Foundation here, he's condemned it in extraordinarily strong terms. Unlike I've seen him condemn many things, honestly. He's not a big condemner, but he's gone out of his way over and over again to distance himself from this project because some of the ideas in it are very radical and very unpopular. But they want to tie this to him, even though he's put out an actual agenda, a Republican Party platform that is the Trump platform that people can go look, and the most controversial parts of Project 2025, like banning abortion medications, like banning all pornography, those things are nowhere to be found in Trump's actual platform. So it seems to me to be deeply unfair to judge a candidate and assign to him blame and responsibility for this is what he'll do, Project 2025, when he's vocally repudiated it over and over again and also put out a separate agenda that is quite different in many of the key and most controversial policies. Now, it's true Trump has some ties to it. Some of the people involved in creating it worked in his White House, and the Heritage Foundation is an influential conservative group. But people who understand politics understand that there's always activist groups creating agendas and white papers and trying to push them in the background. It doesn't mean those ideas are going to all see the light of day, or even that most of them will. It's purely aspirational. So these ideas, some of them I think make a lot of sense in this document. Some of them I think are a little bit Looney Tunes. But ultimately, you can't pin them on Trump when over and over again he said, I don't support this, but that is what mainstream media is doing. And it's the kind of thing that they would so quickly call misinformation or disinformation, or even call to be censored if it was conservatives or Trump supporters that were doing it. But because it's to take down the guy they really don't like, I guess any means are justifying any ends in their mind.
Absolutely. Facebook can classify that iconic shot of Donald Trump with his fist in the air after getting shot as misinformation. It's of course corrected that, but it's absolutely insane. Look, just when we thought it couldn't get any more embarrassing for the Secret Service, it has.
My question is, why don't you relieve everybody of duty who made bad judgment? So yeah, you're right. I am zeroing in on somebody. I'm trying to find somebody who's accountable here. And so you're telling me that the person who made the decision not to include this in the perimeter has not been relieved of duty. What about the person who's in charge of the interoperability of radio frequencies between local law enforcement and Secret Service? Has that person been relieved of duty?
No, Senator, because interoperability is a challenge, is a greater challenge than just one person. On that day, we had a counterpart system. It failed
As the person who made the decision to send Donald Trump onto stage knowing that you had a security situation, has that person been relieved of duty?
No, sir, they haven't.
Has the person who decided not to pull the former president off of stage when you knew that, in your words, the locals were working a serious security situation, has that person been relieved of duty?
No, sir. Again, I refer you back to my original answer that we are investigating this through a mission assurance. And as opposed to zeroing in on one,
what more do you need to investigate to know
exactly what the decision-making process was? What more do you need to investigate
to know that there were critical enough failures that some individuals ought to be held accountable? I mean, what more do you need to know?
It gets more and more upsetting the more I watch it. 3 weeks on, no answers. Are we ever going to get some answers from the Secret Service?
Not unless we hold their feet to the fire, clearly, because if anybody with common sense was running these agencies, heads would already have rolled. But the people involved in this epic security failure have not been fired, the people that actually made the bad calls. And that's just the kind of thing you'd never see in the private sector. I mean, if this was a private company where this had been where they had this kind of failure, I think people would have been fired on the spot. The very next day, the entire security division would have been replaced. But they can continue to, I guess, just cash taxpayer checks and pedal on in their bureaucracy. And there might not be real accountability unless we hold their feet to the fire, because this is a bloated and clearly dysfunctional institution, the Secret Service. And gosh, I mean, we all got so lucky that that bullet missed by just a couple of inches, because of course, you just first of all don't want to see a man killed, a man with a family, but secondly, the absolute chaos our country would have been thrown into, the risk of political violence, of instability everything. We were so close to the brink. It's genuinely, honestly, so amazing in a sense that bullet missed, because the horrors that our country would have experienced, I can't put them into words, to be honest, if it had gone differently. I think it would have been extraordinarily dark for America. So we got incredibly lucky, because there were all these security failures. And at the end of the day, tragedy did occur, of course. Some people were killed and hurt, and many people were traumatized, but it could have been so much worse. And the fact that we're not getting heads rolling and actual accountability. I mean, we did, of course, get the Biden appointee to step down after enormous pressure, who was leading the agency, but it should be way beyond that. There should be way more. I mean, this is the kind of thing that should never, ever be acceptable. But in a bloated government bureaucracy where they can just cash taxpayer checks all day, I guess they think they can get away with this, but it's really something.
And it's really scary. There's still a few months left to go until November 5. Who knows whether there's going to be another attempt? Hopefully not. You know, the other point to make is I just think it's so brave to see Donald Trump up on stage back in Pennsylvania. He took a bullet and less than 3 weeks, he's back rallying. Anyway, we've got those pictures that we'll show to you later on in the program. But